What's going on, guys? It's Brandon back here on free agency day. I'm waiting to do a video on free agency until we get more into it. A lot of deals have been signed. A lot of deals by a lot of teams who are spending a lot of money. But that's not the point of this video. We got the 2010-11 NHL season. Truly a weird one and one of my least favorites. For one, my two least favorite teams now have, at this point, had gone to the Stanley Cup Final. Boston, honestly, I didn't hate as much at this point. Vancouver, I absolutely hated, and by the end of the series, I hated them even more. But I already recorded this video once, but I didn't like how it turned out because I sounded like a whiny you-know-what. And I wanted to redo it. So we'll start with the Central Division. Detroit, after a year off of not winning the Central Division, goes back to doing their winning ways. 47-25-10, 104 points, even though they are really in their declining of the empire. Nashville, 44-27-11 at 99 points. Chicago, 44-29-9 at 97 points, is the 8th seed, and they get in with barely any time remaining. St. Louis, 38-33-11 at 87 points. Columbus, 34-35-13, 81 points. In the Northwest, only one team makes the playoffs, and that's Vancouver. President's Trophy winning Vancouver, somehow. If you look at that team, no reason they should have been anywhere near as good as they were. 54-19-9, 117 points. Calgary just misses out on the playoffs. 41-29-12 with 94 points. Minnesota, 39-35-8, 86 points. Colorado, after making the playoffs, falls out. 30-44-8, 68 points. And then Edmonton, 25-45-12, 61 points. Took Taylor Hall first overall in the 2010 draft. They take Ryan Nugent-Hopkins first overall in this year's draft. San Jose, because they won the lottery again. In the Pacific Division, San Jose leads the way at 48-25-9, 105 points. Anaheim, 47-30-5, 99 points, is back in the playoffs for the first time after a year off. Arizona, 43-26-13, 99 points. That's actually Phoenix, by the way. LA, 46-30-6, 98 points. Dallas, the only team not to make it, and they were 2 points away from making it. 42-29-11, 95 points. You could have had a whole division in the playoffs. That would have been insanity. For Phoenix, I want to talk about Phoenix here. Phoenix has a 50-win season and a 100-point season in 2010. They have a 99-point season in 2011. They have a conference finals appearance, although not as good, in 2012. Phoenix was competitive for a time. This wasn't a failure of a franchise in terms of they weren't competitive. The late 90s, they were a respectable team. They made the playoffs consistently as well as the early 2000s. Then they have their kind of fall off and rebuild. And there's 3 years though they're good again. And then they're just not good at all for the rest of the time until they win that random qualifying round against Nashville. And they weren't necessarily horrible. There were years they were horrible, but they were a very mediocre team. And that's why you couldn't sell the fans on it, I assume, because they weren't. If they had more than one conference finals appearance over the course of 25 years, they definitely would have stayed. I would think. In the East Atlantic Division, Philadelphia leads the way at 47-23-12, 106 points off a finals appearance. You got the hangover Hawks, and then you got the Flyers, who lost in the final and look like to be gearing up to go back. Of course, the Hawks, they are the hangover Hawks because they lost 11 players from their roster. That salary cap and those free agent signings got real screwed up in 2010, and it screwed this entire team for the next year. Pittsburgh, 49-25-8, 106 points as well. The Rangers, back in the playoffs after a year out, 44-33-5, 93 points. The Devils finally fall out of the playoffs at 38-39-5, 81 points. The Islanders slowly getting better, 30-39-13, 73 points. In the Northeast, Boston leads the way, 46-25-11, 103 points. Montreal, 44-30-8 with 96 points. Toronto, Buffalo, inside the playoffs. This is the last time you'll see Buffalo in the playoffs. They do not make it for the next 13 years. 43-29-10, 96 points as well, same as Montreal. Toronto, 37-34-11, 85 points, not horrible. Ottawa, 32-40-10, 74 points, falls off completely. That's 74? 32-64 plus 10, 74. In the Southeast, Washington leads the way, again, 48-23-11, 107 points. Tampa jumps back in after they take Ottawa's spot as the Devils and Rangers switch. 46-25-11, 103 points. Carolina, 40-31-11, 91 points outside the playoffs. they're not going to make it since they're not going to make it 2010, 2011, or the next 8 years. Atlanta, their last year in Atlanta, 34, 36, and 12, 80 points. Florida, 30, 40, and 12, 72 points. In the playoffs, I wish we could skip this. Number 1 seeded Vancouver takes out number 8 seeded Chicago in 7. Vancouver had a 3-game-to-none series lead. The Hawks fight back. Alex Burrows in Game 7. Tough. Only game I've ever cried after. I was also 6 years old at the time. Number 2 seeded San Jose takes out number 7 seeded LA in 6 games. So LA now consistently in the playoffs 2010, 2011. Still get knocked out in the first round. Number 3 seeded Detroit has a rematch with number 6 seeded Phoenix. Detroit, instead of beating them in 7, beats them in 4. So Phoenix out real quick. Number 4 seeded Anaheim back in the playoffs against number 5 seeded Nashville, and Nashville is a bad matchup for Anaheim, just like Detroit's a bad matchup for Phoenix. Vancouver's usually a bad matchup for Chicago. And San Jose and LA, they kind of split 50-50, but Nashville takes out Anaheim in 6, and that's where that narrative of they can't beat Anaheim starts, as well as a Bruce Boudreau narrative. But Boudreau doesn't come in. I don't believe he comes in until the next year, so I'm not sure what I'm getting on about that. But yeah, so Vancouver survives a scare. Nashville upsets Anaheim on a technicality, even though actually they have the same amount of points, so not really an upset. But anyway, in the East, number 1 seeded Washington plays number 8 seeded Rangers, and Washington wins that series in 6. Number 2 seeded Flyers knock out the number 7 seeded Buffalo Sabres in 7. Buffalo had a 3-2 series lead there. Number 3 seeded Boston beats number 6 Montreal in a rare Montreal loss against Boston. Although in the modern era it's a lot more common. That's in 7 games. Montreal won the first 2 games of that series. And I believe they won Game 6 and then lost in Game 7. Pittsburgh shockingly gets knocked out by Tampa in 7. And I remember at the time that was whoa. Number 5 seeded Tampa, number 4 seeded Pittsburgh. Tampa 103 points, Pittsburgh 106, but no one expected Pittsburgh to go down. And we'll get to why maybe Pittsburgh goes down in a bit here. In the second round, number 1 seeded Vancouver takes out number 5 seeded Nashville in 6 because Vancouver is a bad matchup for Nashville. Number 2 seeded San Jose takes out number 3 seeded Detroit in 7. Although they blew a 3-0 series lead to do it, Detroit fights back and forces Game 7 and lose. But San Jose, that's a bad matchup for Detroit. They win that series in 7. Tampa Bay then, after beating Pittsburgh, they sweep number 1 seeded Washington as the number 5 seed in the second round. Meanwhile, Philadelphia, number 2, is swept by number 3 Boston in the second round, meaning in the rematch in that second round, Philadelphia was not coming back from 3-0 down. Boston was on a mission after that Montreal series. In the conference final, number 1 seeded Vancouver takes out number 2 seeded San Jose in 5. Number 3 seeded Boston takes out number 5 seeded Tampa Bay, takes them to 7, and Tampa's out very controversially, as Tampa had a power play that playoffs that rivaled the 2023 Oilers, and there was no penalties called in Game 7, and so theories ranged wild at that time. In the final, it's number 3 seeded Boston from the East and number 1 seeded Vancouver from the West. Game 1, Vancouver wins 1-0 in a very boring game. Rafi Torres, I believe, got the winner with 13 seconds left. That's how that game went. Game 2, Vancouver wins in overtime on a bizarre giveaway by Tim Thomas. I don't know what he was thinking on that play, but Burrows gets the winner in overtime. They win 3-2. And then the series shifts to Boston. Boston wins 8-1. It felt at the time like it felt when Edmonton beat Florida 8-1 at home. Oh boy. And then Boston wins Game 4 4-0 and outscore Vancouver 12-1 in Boston. Game 5, Vancouver wins 1-0 again as Luongo shuts the door. Yet people just love to blame Luongo. Game 6, Boston wins 5-2. Game 7, Boston wins 4-0 as they win the Stanley Cup in Vancouver as riots emerge everywhere. David Krejci leads the playoffs in scoring, 12 goals, 11 assists, 23 points. Led in goals, led in points. Thomas, 16-9 with a .940 save percentage and a 1.98 goals against average. Tim Thomas went on a remarkable run this playoff, and if he played a longer of a time, he had 2 Vezina trophies, he had a Stanley Cup and a Conn Smythe in 3 years. If he played longer, he might have been a Hall of Famer if he got in his chance sooner. Who knows? Of course, what comes out afterward with Thomas is his actions afterward aren't very the greatest, but overall his performances on the ice cannot be ignored. Award winners. Art Ross goes to Daniel Sedin of the Vancouver Canucks, 41 goals, 63 assists, 104 points, and that showed a narrative. Vancouver was carried by really 3 guys. Henrik, Daniel, Luongo. Those 3 carried this team to relevancy. Without any of those 3, this isn't a playoff team. They're not even close to the playoffs. If you look at what surrounded them, Ryan Kesler had the best season of his career. Alex Burrows was good because he played with the Sedins. Mason Raymond got hurt, although he was like one of the only players on the Canucks I liked. Christian Ehrhoff, another favorite of mine, he was good. He ends up leaving. Other than that, I mean, they had Dan Hamhuis to solidify the blue line, but there's no real Alex Edler. Corey Schneider was the backup goaltender. I mean, that's pretty good. But not very many names there that you say, that's a star right there. It's not the Hawks where you have Taves and Kane and Hossa and Keith. People knew who Patrick Sharp was because he was great in the playoffs. It wasn't Dustin Byfuglien. Everyone knew who he was after that playoff. There really was no significant names on the Vancouver Canucks. What it was is a bunch of goons. You had Torres, you had Lapierre, you had Burrows, you had Kessler, you had Alberts, you had, you can just list them off like it's throwing candy out. Anyway, the Masterton goes to Ian Lapierre of the Philadelphia Flyers. The Calder goes to young Jeff Skinner, who just got bought out, of the Carolina Hurricanes. Conn Smythe, as mentioned, goes to Tim Thomas. The Selke goes to Ryan Kesler of the Canucks. The Hart goes to Corey Perry of the Anaheim Ducks. Yes. Jack Adams, Dan Bilesma of Pittsburgh because he managed to win without Crosby. Clancy, Doug Waite of the New York Islanders. Lady Byng, Martin St. Louis. The Norris, I forgot to say, went to Nicholas Lidstrom at age 40. That's why he's a Hall of Famer right away. Ted Lindsay goes to Daniel Sedin. The Messier goes to Zdeno Chara. The Rocket for scoring the most goals. Corey Perry with 50. The Vezina goes to Tim Thomas of Boston. 35, 11, and 9 in the regular season. 9 shutouts, 938 save percentage, and a 2.00 goals against. Compares 2009 and 2011 Vezinas. Phenomenal by Tim Thomas. Not to mention he has the Conn Smythe and Cup that year. The Jennings goes to Roberto Luongo and Corey Schneider of the Vancouver Canucks. And yeah. First team All-Stars, Daniel and Henrik Sedin on left wing and center. Corey Perry on the right wing. Lidstrom and Weber on the blue line. Of course, Weber's now a Hall of Famer. Tim Thomas in net. Second team, Alex Ovechkin, Steven Stamkos, Martin St. Louis, Wisniewski, and Chara on the blue line. I couldn't believe Wisniewski was a second-team All-Star. I really don't remember him being all that, but apparently he was all that. And Pecorine in net. He is indeed too good then. Nashville, of course, was a very defensive team coached by Barry Trotz. And maybe this year they'll be one of the most offensive teams if you've seen the moves. We won't get into that yet. I'll do a separate video on free agency, of course. But they're gearing up, I will say. One name is missing here from all of this. Sidney Crosby. Crosby at this point starts having some concussions. He missed almost 2 seasons of his career because of concussions. We missed prime Sidney Crosby, unfortunately. We got prime Ovechkin, prime Taves, prime Kane, prime Malkin. He stepped up a lot when Crosby went out. Stamkos had his 60-goal season. All the stars of this era. And then Crosby kind of got robbed of his prime. And that shows how really good, how amazing he was because he was able to go beyond these concussions, keep going and play as long as he has, and keep playing and performing at a high rate. That's why he's might be one of those guys that just gets into the Hall of Fame off retirement. You really don't know. Trades this season. Actually, we'll start with free agent signings. As my doorbell starts to ring. One moment. Sorry about that. Package delivery. But free agents. Alex Tanguay goes back to Calgary where he belongs. Sergei Gonchar goes to Ottawa. Manny Malhotra to Vancouver. Sean O'Donnell to Philadelphia nearing the end of his career. He would play one more year. Chris Mason to the Atlanta Thrashers. Paul Martin to the Penguins. Volchenkov to the Devils. Ole Jokinen to Calgary. Johan Hedberg to play backup to Martin Brodeur in New Jersey. Just ran up the stairs back and forth a couple times. Like that was it's exhausting. Dan Hamhuis to Vancouver, Matt Cullen to Minnesota, Ray Whitney to Phoenix. Probably should be a Hall of Famer. Adam Burrish and Andrew Raycroft to Dallas, and I only bring those two up because Burrish is one of the guys the Hawks lost. I'm going to go through, there's a lot of guys on here on the board because I just pointed out that the Hawks lost them. And Andrew Raycroft, for him, I can't believe he was still playing at this point. Chris Higgins to the Florida Panthers, John Scott to Chicago, had to put his name on the board. P.A. Perito to the New York Islanders, Rob Niedermeyer to Buffalo, Joe Corvo to Carolina, Ponikarovsky to the L.A. Kings, Dominic Moore to Tampa Bay. Marty Turco played the backup goaltender for the Chicago Blackhawks that year, behind Corey Crawford. Jamal Mayers to San Jose, Mike Modano to Detroit. That was criminal. He should have never left Dallas. John Madden to Minnesota. That's number 2 that the Hawks lost. Ruslan Saleh of Detroit. Sean Bergenheim, I only mentioned his name because he was very good in the playoffs with Tampa. Aaron Asham to Pittsburgh. 2006 Edmonton Oilers playoffs legend Fernando Persani signs in Chicago. Rafi Torres signs in Vancouver. Willie Mitchell goes to the LA Kings. Antti Niemi, number 3, goes to the San Jose Sharks. Because his claim to fame at that point was he never lost a playoff series. And he didn't until he did with the San Jose Sharks in the conference final. So he won 6 straight playoff series to start a career. So he had a very good start, and then it kind of never just didn't really follow him. It wasn't a bad goaltender, just wasn't that great of a goaltender. Theodore goes to Minnesota, Jose Theodore, because he's just bouncing around at this point. Ruslan Fedotenko goes to the New York Rangers. Brendan Morrison goes to Calgary. Marc-Andre Bergeron goes to the Tampa Bay Lightning. And Ray Emery, rest in peace, goes to the Anaheim Ducks. Big trades. There were a lot of trades this season. I couldn't put all of them on the board, so I put as many as I could, and then I put some notable acquisitions that were throughout the year. June 17th, 2010, Yaroslav Halak, off his fantastic run with the Canadiens, gets traded to St. Louis for Lars Eller and Ian Schultz to Montreal. You probably wonder why, because Carey Price exists. June 22nd, 2010, his value was at an all-time high. You need to get rid of him because you had Price already. Nathan Horton, Gregory Campbell to Boston for Dennis Weidman, a first and a third going to Florida. Trade that would very much benefit Boston. Boston made a lot of moves to improve their team this season. June 24th, 2010, Hawks lose 3 guys in this trade and a minor leaguer. Dustin Byfuglien, Ben Eager, Brent Sopel, Akeem Aliu to Atlanta for Marty Resner, who would be flipped, Joey Crabb, Jeremy Morin, who I'd done a career video on, and a first and a second round pick going to Chicago. The Hawks were not the same after they lost Byfuglien. Byfuglien was going to be a Hall of Famer if he stayed in Chicago. June 24, 2010, I only mentioned this because Colin Fraser, that's another guy that was moved to Edmonton for a 6th. So at that point, you have 3 in that trade alone, 6. Fraser is 7. And we got number 8 because on June 30th, 2010, Christopher Stieg and Sweat, I don't know who that is, are traded to Toronto for Victor Stahlberg, Di Domenico, and Paradis going to Chicago. Stahlberg would play a bottom 6 role with the Hawks in their 2013 Cup victory. July 1st, 2010, Andrew Ladd is traded to the Atlanta Thrashers for Wisniewski and a second going to Chicago. So that's at number 9. So you got 7, 8, 9. July 19th, 2010, Simone Gagne is traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning for Matt Walker and a 4th round pick. January 1st, 2011. So 6 months later, Islanders are not in a good spot, and they think Rolison's kind of done. His career's kind of done. He's traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning for Paul Wishart, and Rolison turns it on when he gets to Tampa. Every time he joins a new team, he's phenomenal. We saw what he did with the Oilers in 2006. He did the same thing with the Tampa Bay Lightning in this season. January 22nd, and this isn't a trade, but I need to point it out. Evgeny Nabokov decides at the end of the previous season in 2010, he leaves San Jose and says, I'm going to go to Russia and play in the KHL. Midway through, he's kind of like, okay, I'm ready to go back to the NHL. He signs with Detroit, but to sign with Detroit, he needed to go through waivers. The New York Islanders claimed him off waivers, and Nabokov refused to go. After much convincing, he did eventually go, and he would be a very solid goaltender for the Islanders. February 9th, 2011, Francois Beauchemin is traded back to Anaheim from when he was where he won a Stanley Cup for Joffrey Lupul, Jake Gardner, and a 4th going to Toronto. So that's the second time Lupul's been traded out of Anaheim for a bigger asset. February 9th, 2011, Michael Frolik and Salak are traded to Chicago for Jack Skilly, Hugh Jesseman, and Pecan. So you got a couple busts in there, and Michael Frolik would be another key piece of that bottom six in that 2013 run. February 10th, 2011, Mike Fisher, the husband of Carrie Fisher or Carrie Underwood, is traded to Nashville for a first and a conditional pick going to Ottawa. February 14th, 2011, Chris Versteeg is traded again, this time to Philadelphia for a first and a third going to Toronto. February 15th, 2011, Chris Kelly is traded to Boston for a second going to Ottawa, so Boston's loaded up, and they keep doing it. We'll get to more of those. February 18th, 2011, Craig Anderson is traded to Ottawa, where he would remain for most of the rest of his career, for 1-for-1 for Brian Elliott going to Colorado. February 18, 2011, Rich Peverley and Valabeek are traded to Boston for Blake Wheeler and Mark Stewart going to Atlanta. Wheeler, currently only the last Thrasher still playing in the NHL. February 18, 2011, Boston's not done. Frank Cabriolet is traded to Boston for Joe Coburn, a first and a conditional second going to Toronto. I believe that's a second. February 19th, 2011, Eric Johnson and Jay McClement, along with a first-round pick, are traded to Colorado for Chris Stewart, Kevin Shattenkirk, and a second going to St. Louis. Eric Johnson, of course, the first overall pick in 2006. He's moved to Colorado, where he'd spend most of his career, and then he ends up in Buffalo, and now he's in Philadelphia. February 21st, 2011, Alex Goligoski is traded to Dallas for James Neal and Matt Niskanen going to Pittsburgh. So I thought that was an interesting one. February 28, 2011. I only mention this because this guy ruined my life. Chris Campoli and a seventh to Chicago for Patolny and a second going to Ottawa. Chris Campoli, of course, makes the play, the dumb play to try to dump the puck over Burrows, who catches the puck and scores on the back of the net on Crawford in Game 7 overtime of the first round. February 28, 2011. Dustin Penner is traded to the LA Kings for Tubert, a first and a third. That's conditional going to Edmonton. And that'd be all of the deals I wrote on the board. Other assets that were acquired. Vancouver ends up getting Chris Higgins and Max Lapierre. Washington ends up getting Jason Arden and Dennis Weidman. Boston ends up getting Anton Hudobin to play third-string goaltender behind Thomas and Rask. Rask lost the job. I will say I didn't mention Rask. Thomas has the job in 2009, loses it in 2010 to Tuukka Rask, and in 2011 he has it back. And then, of course, he leaves Boston for part of the season in 2012. Actually, I think he plays 2012 and then he leaves partially. But other acquisitions, Phoenix gets Radoslav Klesla and Michael Roosevelt, both are the blue line. Pittsburgh gets Alexei Kovalev, who's probably 45 at this point. Montreal ends up getting Brent Sopel and Nigel Dawes. San Jose gets Ben Eager, and Tampa Bay ends up getting Eric Brewer, just to some notable names there. So the Hawks, every name that they've lost in there was mentioned, along with Cristobal Huet. Didn't even mention him. He ends up going back to France to play. But yeah, that's really going to be all I have for you guys in this one. Tell me down below what you thought of the 2010-11 season. Were you as not happy as I was, or were you kind of happy about it? Anyway, we got a free agency video coming soon. I'm not sure when that'll be. This video will probably be posted, because this video is being posted on the day of free agency when my last first-round pick video comes out. This one is either going to be posted tomorrow or Wednesday, or maybe even Thursday if I can push it back that far. Of course, I'm leaving for vacation on Friday, so I'm trying to get as many videos pre-uploaded as possible. I want to thank you all so much for watching this video, and I shall see you all in the next one. Have a good one.